The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. It was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
We are the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, HVERI for short. A lot of people know us from the 2018 eruption of Kilauea in the Lower East Rift Zone. Working under Hawaii Tracker on the Facebook group. Since then, we've been trying to carry on and take the lessons, the hard lessons that were learned during that eruption and try and prepare for the next major disaster that comes to our island.
Yeah, and so we do that through two different programs. One is volcano education, and the other part is digital resilience, which we address through online groups on social media. So the way the two programs work together is that the social media networks end up being a distribution pathway for all the information. And having that network in place means we can provide more than just volcano education, but any other preparedness information as well.
What we were working for really came about in the Mauna Loa eruption in 2022. Within hours of that eruption starting, we had the mayor, Mitch Roth, we had USGS HVO Ken Hahn on the stream trying to help flush out a little bit of the ongoing because it's so new. It's completely different from our previous major eruption, which was 2018.
One of the things that Talmadge and I were talking about was how do we deal with social media? And it was something we needed to figure out and get right. Our job is to get information to the public and make sure that the public get it as well as possible and as correctly as possible. When Philip and Dan started coming to you and live streaming the meetings, it was great because we were reaching more people than we normally would. So when the eruption actually happened, we had this relationship. The interviews we did during the eruption, the most fun ones were the ones with Philip and Dave because they were more relaxed and we knew we were getting to the local community and people were asking questions. So those were the best, I think. I just want to really give a shout out to those guys and how we worked as a team on this eruption. It really worked out well and we got to a lot of people we wouldn't have normally gotten.
Hello everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from nonprofit HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. Today is Thursday, December 19th, 2024. It's been an interesting week on Kilauea with earthquakes cycling back up and then perhaps calming a little bit now. So we'll talk about that. And we'll finish our series on Mauna Loa that we've been covering in commemoration of its 2-year anniversary with a little segment on interactions and connections between Kilauea and Mauna Loa, what the links might be between them. So that's what we have on our menu today, Dane. How have you been? How's your week been?
Doing pretty good, you know. Got my Christmas mug here, trying to get into the little holiday spirit and ready for a little bit of a break if Kilauea allows it. We will see. We did have a word get put in by a friend of ours asking Pele to give us a little bit of time, but you know, all jokes aside, we're happy to be here and be able to maybe run the year out with one more stream, maybe.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so this is our last planned stream of the year. We'll see if that holds with the activity in the volcano, but as it's doing a similar pattern as we've seen in the past, and the threat is mostly within a national park there. And also we've been working really hard all year, so we're going to take a couple weeks off here until that second week of January is our plan. So yeah, all that said, we can get into it. What do you think?
Yeah, if anybody got any questions, we're going to be doing 2 parts today with the current activity up front. Then we're going to go back to Mauna Loa and the Kilauea relationship and the 2022 eruption at the end. So 2 segments. If you got questions on either, go ahead and drop them in the chat.
All right. So as I rearrange ourselves here, we'll get ready to do our summary. Hello, everyone. This is our Hawaiian Volcano Summary for December 19th, 2024. This past week, the earthquakes on Kilauea cycled back up, and in the last couple of days have decreased as well. But this follows the previous week of quiet that followed a previous ramp up in earthquakes. So we're seeing this pulsing effect of magma within Kilauea filling and then pressurizing areas underground, leading to these earthquakes. The thing that's been a little different about the earthquakes this past week has been the location has been contained mostly within the summit, and in particular the southern part of the summit, Kaluapele here. In the last few weeks, we've seen earthquakes ramp up. They've also ramped up near the recent eruption site at Nāpau crater, right around in here, or perhaps a little bit further west between Makapui and Nāpau, right in there. We've not seen any activity at Pu'o'o or further down rift, so the activity is fully contained within a national park here. But this past week, it seems to have pinched off somewhere as some likely temporary adjustment in the magma pathways has focused activity all in the summit region, as you can see here. You do see some south flank activity in response as it continues to move seaward in response to the filling and stretching of the volcano. And that's essentially what the volcano is doing now. It's stretching to accommodate all these extra pressure from the magma building underground. So we'll have to wait to see if this leads to further adjustments or potentially intrusions or eruptions in the future. But for now, it seems to have found a way to adjust and quiet its pressure underground. If we look at the tilt on the volcano, we see this reflected. We have 2 lines here. This blue one is for the summit. The green is for Pu'o'o. So you see the summit has had some variations. The overall past month of tilt gain has been significant, about 10 microradians or so, where rift zone has been steadily decreasing that time. And the USGS has reported that while the earthquakes have ramped up, has been coincident with this increase in tilt as well. So we'll start down at the rift to just show you how this pattern has changed. This is a Pu'o'o tilt meter, which the main component, the blue one towards the rift zone, has been steadily downhill, or deflating, I should say. Whereas the component that faces to the west, we've seen it inflate in response to filling of the Nāpau Makapui reservoir recently. However, that was stabilized previous week, and this past week is actually deflating. So we see the opposite effect in that recent eruption site. Further up rift at the escape road tilt meter at the East Rift connector, Upper East Rift, we have seen this component tracking intrusion of magma into that nearby reservoir as well. So it has also been inflating. It's one of the few stations in this rift area still inflating for part of this past week, but you can see it's equilibrated in the last few days here as well. Closest to the summit, we have the Sandhill tiltmeter, and you can see that there's been a massive scale of tilt gain. And we're talking about 35 microradians or so over the last month. Although within the last week, similarly to the Upper East Rift, we had a stable period followed by some inflation and then re-equilibration in the last couple of days here. So it was during this inflation period we saw the increase in earthquakes, but things seem to have quieted down. Longer term, this is the distance north and south across the caldera of Kilauea. And so we can see an extension of the caldera with an increase of the slope here, meaning that the sides are getting further apart faster before this quiet down in this most recent couple of dots here on the graph. On the rift zone at Pu'o'o on the Middle East Rift, we see that there was earlier in the year an effect from the intrusion that reached near that eruption site to establish that new reservoir, reconnect it to the magma system. And since then, we've had some variations, but not much real gain in distance, despite a lot of variation in the meantime. So that's Kilauea, a lot of adjustments happening and pulsing of the magma coming into it. On Mauna Loa, this is the whole last month of earthquakes. You see a background pattern very randomly dispersed across the whole map here. So looking at the whole year, you see a little more, but still very dispersed activity across the entire summit region of Mauna Loa there. Because the real story is that in comparison to the pre-2022 eruption, the buildup back from 2020, shown on the graph of the last 5 years, is still quite a bit higher than what we're experiencing now. So we're still in this post-eruption phase, recharging the volcano as magma comes into it, as the volcano has steadily been tracking upwards, sometimes a little faster and sometimes a little slower, but refilling over the whole last year here in the predicted pattern. And that's our Hawaiian volcano summary for this week. So we will continue. We'll start today with our observations of Kilauea. Here's a webcam image of the KW camera at the summit, looking down at Halema'uma'u at our most recent summit eruption sites. And you can see there's been a lot of degassing and mineral buildup on this crusted crater floor and around these vents on the wall of the crater as well. But overall, it's been fairly passively degassing in the area. And this gas is actually the biggest current threat we have from the volcano, apart from the potential for earthquakes that we always live with and have to be prepared for. So this is the summit view. And we'll go down to the southwest rift, which if we consider our past year, we've had eruptions in the southwest rift and the southeast rift. So in the southwest rift, we at one point earlier this year looking at this camera for eruption visuals, and everything looks quiet there, and Mauna Loa nicely in the background with its textbook shield volcano shape back there. Beautiful to see. So speaking of the southeast rift, we have that camera there as well. So here is the S2 camera looking across Nāpau crater towards Kananui-Ohamo, lava shield forested as it's older by now. And down and behind there is Makapui crater. You can't see it on this view, but you see a little bit of the gas right in between from the fissure that cut across between Makapui all the way into Nāpau, in fact, and poured lava into Nāpau crater. So pretty quiet out there as well, with some maybe more minor steaming still ongoing. Pretty quiet on the surface. Those are our visuals for this week. And we'll move on to our volcanic hazard, which is still a gas at this point. And as usual, we'll lean on the VMAP, Vog Measurement and Prediction Project out of University of Hawaii at Manoa. And they are combining the emission rates from the volcano with the current weather conditions. And this is a resulting forecast showing that there are some times when the winds are blowing from the south, bringing some of this Vog north into the saddle region. But other times you see it dispersing to the southwest, and appearing in the upper slopes of South Kona and South Hawaii as well. So this is as for those of us who are living here and used to some background activity. This is within a normal background. However, the emissions are still considerable, and anyone who's sensitive should take the precautions and follow the guidance of the national park if you're in those closest areas to the vents. So that is our hazard summary. It's not very long, thankfully, these days. We'll move on to earthquakes next and see what all the fuss is about over this past week or so. To start, though, we'll look at the earthquakes plotted for the last 2 days only. And so you can see it's actually fairly quiet around Kilauea Summit and East Rift. We do see some south flank events here. And these are all colored by depth, right? So I'll pop this on here so you can see the depths. The blues are the deepest, reds are the shallowest, with the greens, yellows, and oranges in between there. So here's our deep Pahala earthquakes in blue, our shallow Kilauea earthquakes. Usually the ones that are in this region are the ones in the magma system right there, down through here as well, if they're in reds and oranges. And the ones over here are the south flank population that is always tracking the movement of this piece of land in a response to the filling of the summit and East Rift of Kilauea. So that's the zoomed in version. We can zoom out a little bit. See, there have been other earthquakes of adjustment. Here's a 2.4 that was probably right at the surface of the seafloor, with some error of detection there. And there has been some on Mauna Loa on the east flank between Mauna Loa and Kilauea, as perhaps there are some adjustments still ongoing there as volcanoes are both adjusting to magma coming in. But if we pull back to the last 2 weeks, we'll get a survey request. But if we go past that, you see our background events across the island. So I'm going to zoom back in here. You see Pahala has been quite active, as is usual. We almost don't talk about it as much anymore. You see a little bit more clearly this zone of adjustment between Kilauea and Mauna Loa active within the last 2 weeks. And continuing to zoom in further, there is that big cluster of earthquakes right around Halema'uma'u and the South Caldera area, right through there. All in these reds mostly. You do have a couple of these yellows and one deeper blue one adjusting in here. And what's most curious is that we don't see anything all through here, right? And we had seen that perhaps there's a little bit of a gap in earthquakes through here nowadays, and we were seeing filling of this reservoir. This is where that escape road station is. But we were seeing that movement all the way into this Makapui reservoir as well. And so somewhere between here and here, maybe something got rerouted, gunked up. I don't know how you choose to think of it, or what's the proper way to think of it, right? In some way, that pathway got disrupted there. And maybe the path into the rift was multiple before, both through these shallow areas, but also we've heard some suggestion there maybe there was some deeper pathway into the rift area, and maybe we're redistributing those potential pathways. We saw in the past year that all the earthquakes that we're seeing feeding into the southwest rift that were active for so long have really quieted off substantially. It's hard to see anything these days anymore. So it's another example of how this plumbing system can evolve and change over time with eruptions and movement of the volcano and all of that. So it's likely to just keep changing, and at some point it'll reestablish that path. I would bet sooner than later, more than likely. And then we'll be back to our usual pattern. The question really is, can the volcano handle more adjustments before building enough pressure to possibly pop out a little eruption at the summit, let's say, as one example? And only Pele knows the answer to that. So we have to wait and see. So that's the earthquakes colored by depth there, which I think is the easier way to understand them. But if you're in the middle of an earthquake swarm, then we like to color them by time, right? With the most recent, let's see, where's the key? Here's the key. The most recent hour in red, day in orange, week in yellow, and that's all we'll probably be showing here. And so you can see there, everything is in the last couple hours, and there's no reds, so nothing within the last hour. And that once again shows how quiet things are at the surface here. And we go back to the last 7 days, all magnitudes, and now you can see those earthquakes here as well. And We can do a little bit more forensics on this. We can zoom in, so all these are the ones showing on our map. And list only the earthquakes shown. Most recent one looks like it was yesterday at 11:30 in the morning. And the largest one, if we sort it this way, in here was a 3.1. That was down there, followed by a 2.3 over here, and a 2.2 in between the two. And so it shows you this area of adjustment here in the South Caldera, bordering Halema'u. So interesting stuff with the earthquakes. We can dig into it a little more with our monitoring streams. So we'll turn to that next. And put on the USGS notices here. So on Tuesday, the USGS issued its normal weekly notice, but they did note that starting in the morning of Saturday the 14th, there were several modest upticks in seismic activity underneath the volcano summit, lasting from an hour to a few hours, and often accompanied by minor inflation. So because of that, they have switched from weekly updates to daily updates, which began yesterday, in fact, on Wednesday. And so that means we have two further updates beyond this one, right? But this first one that was weekly was highlighting this recent change in the nature of this unrest at Kilauea, and slightly more elevated, not super elevated, but enough for them to switch back to their daily updates from weekly updates. So they note here, overall, there were about 250 earthquakes underneath the summit, most at depths of 1 to 3 miles under the surface, and most below magnitude 2. And we highlighted the ones that were above just now. They note since the September eruption in the East Rift Zone, there have been sustained rates of inflation at the summit. And so that's showing you where the magma has been building up. The most recent gas rate was 70 tons per day on October 17th, value representative of the background and non-eruptive conditions at Kilauea. Because we've had more Kona winds and unfavorable weather, there's been a delay in acquiring new emission rates. That entire time, earthquake counts in the shallow upper and middle East Rift Zone were low. They noted 70 earthquakes in Middle East Rift and approximately 40 in that time, with steady deformation on GPS and tilt meters. No changes downrift there. The prognosis still being that data show magma continuing to move at a low rate into the volcano, meaning future intrusions and eruptions could occur. So that's the story from the USGS there. That was the most exciting update, the one on Tuesday that announced we'd have further updates and that there were earthquakes happening. But by that next day, seismicity at the summit was low for the previous 24 hours, continued to be low on the rift zones. They did note continued summit inflation and increased seismic activity suggests an increasing amount of magma is being stored underneath the summit area here. So that's really it. In those previous 24 hours, there were only 14 earthquakes at the summit, and they noted let's see here, they say 70, but I don't think this is for that particular day there. So I think that's maybe an artifact. So the one that was issued today, this update, is equally less exciting, with seismicity over the last 24 hours at the summit showing only 8 earthquakes, all below magnitude 2. So that is the story here from the USGS. We have all the data streams as well, and we show them to you guys here. To start, the elevation of the crater floor is not moving enough that we can see it with the laser rangefinder. We'll have to turn to our INSAR data for that. But here you can see over the last week this ramping up of earthquakes, and then this plateau here at the top, and then ramping down yesterday. And today is not all the way complete, but it is tracking to be lower than yesterday, in fact, as well here. And you can see that this mirrors the tilt at the summit in blue here over the last week pretty closely as well too, with the East Rift signal showing no regard for any of that, just doing its own thing, cruising with deflation regardless of what's happening at the summit. In the old days, we would see every change of the summit connected by the magma supply all the way to Pu'o, mirrored with a slight delay of perhaps a few hours down on the Middle East Rift as well. So if you've been watching this graph for a long time, this is really showing that the connection is not there between Pu'o and the summit at this time. So depth versus time for the last week on our earthquakes. Here you can see that shallow orange band of earthquakes ramping up here and then ramping down, and you can see there's still further events, and maybe the character got slightly deeper here afterwards as maybe recharge is happening lower down with this steady, more random flare-ups of earthquakes in the deep Pahala zone all through here. So we looked at this week-long map there already, and there's not really much to highlight besides what we've gone through. And there they are in a cross-section. You can see here that the yellow band of earthquakes actually spreads quite a bit more laterally, where these orange ones cluster more so under the summit. So the south flank is over here moving away. But you can see a little bit of how these patterns of yellow, if I come back up here, now these yellows are coming in a little bit later, showing that perhaps flank adjustment as well as deeper events under the summit there. So that's the last week. And we go to the last month. Similarly, we don't see a whole lot of change in elevation from the laser. We see the earthquakes cycling up and down twice within the last month, shorter this time, right? That's a shorter bit of a cycle. But you can see there that corresponds to that tilt increase and decrease as well. Whereas when we had this previous ramp up, we had that increase in tilt, a little dip in between. Maybe we have a little dip in between here as well. But that inflation trend continued all the way to the peak as well of the earthquakes. And then when it's stabilized, then earthquakes trended back down earlier in the month. So we'll see it's slightly different than we saw earlier, right? It's only the summit rather than being the summit and the rift like we saw earlier this month. So that's the curious thing to note here. And that's following the same pattern as the sandhill, right? When the sandhill is the one that's showing the most magnitude. So it must be closer to that source, or it's moving more in that area. And here's depth and time for the last month. So there we see that deeper adjustment earthquake we had a few weeks ago. But here is this shallow gap in the oranges and the ramp back up over the last week right through there. For the last year, we look at earthquakes per week as our measurement here. So you can see this last week has been a little bit higher. Does not quite match 2 and 3 weeks ago, but it is higher than last week and the previous month to that. So for the same year, we can see here the GPS across the summit. And typically when we see these big drops, we have either a major intrusion or an eruption, something like that. So we can see the corresponding earthquake spikes right there for that February intrusion into the Southwest Rift as we reviewed 2024 here. All right, then we saw it recover, build back up. We saw buildup of earthquakes in May that eventually led to the eruption in June on the Southwest Rift in the area first activated by that intrusion there in February. So that's all in this zone right in here. And there are several more intrusion pulses before it actually erupted out there. Right, so then it's continued stretching as magma is still coming into the system, refilling and recovering, and then extending it even further to where we built up to this was that first intrusion into the Middle East Rift Zone that affected the Pu'o GPS as well. So in fact, Pu'o GPS is down in here, right? And we can see that it was steadily decreasing all that time we've been talking about early in 2022 until this period in July, right? We're actually with a little bit of delay because it hit the earlier, the further up rift part of the rift zone first, the summit first, and then made its way down, hitting Pu'o, and that's what causes the big extension across the rift zone at Pu'o right there. And so, but that's followed by an actual eruption on the East Rift in September at Nāpau. That's that drop right in there. And since then, as USGS has said, the volcano has been steadily refilling, has recovered and extended beyond where it previously was when it pulsed into the East Rift to cause that intrusion and then that eruption. So here we are. If we zoom it in, we can see this acceleration of the rate here once again, and then a little relaxation here as imagine as this pulse is causing an extension and movement of the volcano, a little adjustment happening here. So that's the story of 2024 on Kilauea Summit and on the East Rift there, with a couple of eruptions reestablishing the rift zones of the volcano here for the first time post 2018 collapse. So yeah, been a fascinating year. We can zoom out a little bit further. Here's the last 5 years, earthquakes per month. So we can see this ramp up in activity here at the summit as we're activating the rifts here in 2024. And here is those bigger drops you see in the 2024 lasting just through here. And long term from 2020, the volcano was recharging following the collapse. December 2020 was our first eruption following 2018 collapse. That eruption, even though this drop only lasts for perhaps a month or so, volcano starts extending again, even as lava is still coming out. So lava was coming out from January all the way to May of 2021, all through here. Then it stops until September when it begins again. There is that September eruption that began in 2021, and likewise, it didn't last very long as far as adjusting the distance across the caldera, but the volcano kept erupting. In fact, all the way until December of 2022, right through here. And that is what we'll discuss later today when Mauna Loa erupted, end of November here, and affected Kilauea. And once that happens, then we go on to recover and reignite our eruption in Kilauea that had stopped in response to Mauna Loa in January 2023. So there's a little dip right there. All right, that leads us to our where am I? June 2023 summit eruption of Kilauea, the one that was on that southwest wall that was oozing down and filling that whole area, covering that southwest down drop block. And then we move to September 2023, somewhere in here, where we had a down drop block eruption, Kilauea summit. That's now the fifth eruption of Kilauea and the sixth one if you count Mauna Loa in the last 6 years here. Before the two we have this year, that we mentioned before. The one in June on the Southwest Rift, and June on the Southwest Rift, and the one in September on the Southeast Rift. So, yeah, on Kilauea, 7 eruptions in the last 6 years. If you count Mauna Loa 2, that's 8 eruptions on the island here in the last 6 years. So, busy. Here is a response at Pu'o'o. You can see that following a 2018 eruption, it was also recharging and recovering as well. And then once that summit eruption began in 2021 is when it began its contraction across Middle East Rift that lasted years until this most recent intrusion into the East Rift, wiggling things back open again. So clearly it's mobile now, but it does seem to have stabilized after that first pulse, but certainly will move again at some point there. So, and this is why we keep an eye on it, because this is the gateway to that lower East Rift, and so far everything looks good over here at Pu'o'o. Just seeing it change a little bit, and there's still a buffer zone beyond here as well. So that is our GPS. 5 years. We do have our 2-year GPS as well, which our data stream from the USGS is still being worked upon. Looks like some of these stations require a little more time. But overall, these are 2-year plots. You can see that the pattern is pretty similar within what we see, right? What's happening now is what's been happening every other build-up point of the volcano in the last couple of years here. So especially at the summit, here at the east, at Byron's Ledge, at the outlet as well. Some kind of patterns there. And Ahua just south of the summit, the South Caldera area still rising as it was before. And otherwise, we have to go all the way back to Pu'o'o to see the East Rift site updated to now. And there in more detail, you can see there's that part of the 2-year decrease in elevation at Pu'o'o, a little bump up, and little wiggles and adjustments, but nothing like that initial pulse. That was the dike reestablishing the East Rift pathway. So a lot of interesting stuff happening here, and let's make sure we summarize our year as well. So one last thing on our monitoring stream is our INSAR. And this week we are relying on the Mounts project here. And so there's a latest interferogram image that goes through the 17th of December, a couple of days ago. So let's show you what that looks like. And here it is. And if you recall, it's tricky to read interferograms. We had a whole volcano watch last week on this, and how beyond the actual order of the colors indicating the sequence towards or away, you also have this offset view depending on which way the satellite's flying by and its look angle right there. So maybe we can practice this a little bit, and we'll look at our image here. It's hard to see in black at the very top, but there is the direction of travel, and there is the line of sight of the satellite. Right? So if there's a skewing, it's likely in this direction anywhere on there, right? So we look at the colors, and if I look at the colors here, I see two different patterns. You see there's a series of rainbow fringes right there within the collapsed pit of Maunaulu, and then there's another seemingly center right over here to the right, which is really fascinating, right? So the way I think of it is, let's go towards the peak, like walk up the hill here. So our colors go from green to red to blue to green. And if we look here, we see green to red, continuing to blue, continuing to green. That is towards the radar that's coming up towards us. So this is an inflation center right here. So there is our inflation center for the last 11 days underneath that downdrop block area here within the pit of Maunaulu. And one interesting thing to me is that we've heard in the past USGS talk about the shapes of these, and when they're more circular and rather than being like a butterfly shape, then that indicates it's a little bit deeper. So it's interesting that we have this deeper source here underneath the downdrop block, right? And added on all the extra fill that's been erupted into here over the last 6 years that we discussed. So that's this main pattern. If we look at that zoomed in segment right there, and we look, let's see here, here's a center, right? And we're actually going from, or make it even bigger to make it more clear, green to blue to red. So we go green to blue to red. That's away from the radar, if I'm reading this right. And so that means that you're seeing this area that was the fill of the pit with all these eruptions, maybe sagging a little bit, dropping in, while right next to it, right over here, is actually rising, which is really fascinating. I thought at this point, this made me think of this 2018 collapse animation from radar, right, of how the crater actually collapsed here. So you see at the final picture, there's our downdrop block all the way through here. How we started off, we're going to end up. We actually start in the middle, and so that's where the deepest pit turns out to be, is where that original lava lake was, and it's very center. But you can kind of see that this entire area within this ring is moving. It's all mobile around this ring fault right here. So everything that looks stable in here, even this downdrop block, is not actually rooted. It's kind of floating in there on all this stuff that's moved before. Right? That's the point of showing this now. Besides really how fascinating it is to watch how this transpired. But so if we come back to, oh, not to this, but to here, and we see, okay, if this whole thing is mobile all through here, and we have a bulging source down here at the bottom, maybe it's just wiggling this pile and stuff's moving differently, right? This is all one coherent block on this side. And over here, we have some combination of the lava mush that's left in there, the goo that's not all the way hardened, and all the layers that have hardened of eruptions over the time, mixed with all the other products that are in there. Right, so maybe what it looks like is this stuff is sinking while this stuff is rising, and kind of pushing on this inverted cone, like an ice cream cone from below. And maybe on one side the nuts are falling in, and the other side the thing is rising. It's something weird and very localized like that, right? And to dig into it a little bit more, we can go back to the previous version of this map from December 5th, the previous 12 days of that. And there is our same pattern, green to red to blue, green to red to blue towards the radar. So inflating here. And then in detail, we zoom into that other spot right in there. You have the green to blue to red deflating here. But in this case, you actually have a little narrow band of inflation or coming towards the satellite right in between there, right? So going down, going up, going up. And this one right here, blue to red to green, blue to red to green, going down, right? So it's like a down, up, going across this what is this? Probably a half-mile piece of land. So a lot of localized wiggling happening there, right? That's the interesting point there. And let's go back to the previous version to that. So now from November 23rd, and you see there is that similar bullseye, then inflation over here on the right side. And we zoom into that one. Where is that one? Here. And that looks a little bit more like a butterfly pattern, a little bit. It's got two wings at least. So maybe this one is a little bit shallower. But if that's a shallow wing thing, then it's like whatever was feeding all the magma in here maybe is draining down or whatever. Something's kind of adjustments happening underneath this big pile as it's getting pushed from below here. So that's fascinating. And whatever was in there is getting a little bit, I don't know, maybe not disrupted, but it's getting shuffled around a little bit. I'm not sure what the right verb is escaping me right now. But some wiggling going on in there. So we go back even further, and this is when we saw that pattern first taking shape. So here we are back in November, and we'll go back one more before that, when it was not quite as clear pattern. And actually, when we go back to October, still at that point in time, we look zoomed in. This is a green to blue to red, green to blue to red going away right there. And so it's been happening a long time like that. This thing is just intensifying because you see that this pattern, when we zoom it back to what we have right now, the number of rings indicates the scale, right? So if I show you one or two rings,
I think we lost Phil there. We go ahead and get Lou in here. Till Phil gets back.
Yeah. I was trying to.
About,
I know you're working a little behind the scenes, and I was trying to get your attention because I saw Phil just kind of fade off there.
Well, the problem is that I saw it immediately, but I always assume nowadays that it's my internet that's.
Oh, right.
So I went to switch to Starlink as my first reaction to that.
Yeah.
Not great. So yeah, we're talking a little interferogram here, a little bit of it about the inflation, maybe potentially shallowing.
Hey, I got a question for you on the INSAR. If you could answer this, then somebody had messaged me on the side on it. With the darker colors, that's where the magma is at. Would that be right?
Yeah, I'm just bringing something up. Sorry. Darker colors on that, on the interferogram, wouldn't necessarily, my understanding, wouldn't necessarily mean anything of itself. It's more about the color cycling. So when you see the colors cycle, that's what matters, right? Okay. And you see those.
That makes sense to me.
The dense, it's like the rings of the tree, right? The closer those cycles are, the more inflation or deflation, whichever it may be, is happening.
That's good. I don't know too much about the INSAR, and apparently it's good to get that kind of question to me.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, looks like Phil has got internet problems, so we're going to jump into a community corner. How's that?
Sounds like a plan. You're queued
up. There we are. Well, there's not a lot happening, obviously, because it is the holidays here. Even though we are tucked out into the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there's holidays out here. But let's go around the park and see what's going on. Our closures are all still about the same. Ongoing construction is happening at the park. All roads are open up there. The ongoing construction, as you can see, is still there. None of these have changed in the last couple weeks. I put it up here just in case you missed an episode and our broadcast, so you can see what's going on there. Do know this, that at the park, construction is continuing. I don't see them stopping other than the holiday. And so pay attention to crews that are moving around and big machines. The entrance is what's going on. Right now, this is a shot from, I think, 24 hours ago. There's a single lane closure right after the entrance with traffic flaggers and detour through the park administrative buildings. I haven't been through the park today, so I don't know if this is still ongoing. Just go slow in there, especially once the gates close at night. The date got pushed back to February 17th for the closure up there. That's KVC restrooms, sidewalks, water station, and about half of its parking will be unavailable during the construction parking lot. The Volcano House and Volcano Art Center Gallery will remain open, and I encourage you to go to the Volcano House. It's a really nice place, especially this time of year because it's cold for some of us at the park, and they have a fireplace and a place to hang out, so check it out. The park film and programs like After Dark in the Park and the Leo Manu are suspended until KVC opens. The project could take up to 2 years. That is eruption and weather pending. And I did track down, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this is a sketch of what they're building up there. So the new pavilion, the inside of it's all going to be covered and open. It's kind of nice. Dane, have you seen this? Nope, he's busy. Audio.
Back when they released it only, but that was a while back. I feel like over a year ago, maybe 2. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the first time I actually tracked it down on their website.
Right.
And there's a full shot of it. So it should be a nice improvement, especially since it's often raining up there and there isn't a lot of big covered area to hang out in. So looking forward to that. Life on the Edge is the only program that I saw because the After Dark in the parks are closed. They do have rangers around there doing different things. This is Life on the Edge. It's going on from December 1st through the 31st. There's 4 time slots during the day, 10, 11, 1, and 2 p.m. It's 30 minutes. You can meet them up at Waikahuna parking area. Check that one out there. And I think Phil is going to talk about this a little bit, but I'm going to drop it because it's pretty amazing. There are a lot of different speakers, 19 different speakers, 14 locations island-wide, 21 programs for this January's Volcano Awareness Month. If you are here, I encourage you to attend one of them. They're all over the island. It's pretty big. Community talks, talk story tables, and guided walks. Stay tuned because we will be live streaming a lot of them. And if we can't live stream, we will definitely record it and put it up on HVERI on YouTube and our other platforms. So hopefully Phil will go into a couple in there. The Tsunami Museum. I don't know if you guys have been watching the post, but we've been dropping some information on them. They just came out on the news, and I wanted to put up just their schedule here. And December was an interesting month for tsunamis around the world. There's a lot of history. Don't know if you know this, but in historical data, 600,000 lives have been lost to tsunamis. And Nathan Becker from NOAA says it's the only museum that saved lives. So check out this place. Give them a call or send them an email to find out. Make sure they're open. Hawaii safety depends on proactive tsunami awareness and education, empowering communities to respond swiftly and minimize loss during coastal emergencies. Sorry, Carrie, I was rolling pretty fast there. And there's an inside shot. I don't know if you know this, but this was the old bank. And there you go, Dano's setting up. This was a bank at one time, and that's a picture of the vault. And that vault is now the media room. And then they have several displays all over the museum. So it's a fantastic place. Give yourself a good hour to go around there. And if you are not subscribed to our newsletter, I encourage you to do so. scan that QR code or go to hveri.org/subscribe to stay informed of all the updates and information that we have. We put out our newsletter the first week of the month, and they are all available on our website at hveri.org if you missed one. And Dane, are you ready for me? Audio, Dane.
Oh, ready for this part?
Yeah.
Sorry, they're trying to get a lot going.
No, I know. It's okay.
Yeah, so would like to thank Kilauea Recovery and the Puna Strong through the County of Hawaii, as well as the Hawaii Community Foundation, to be able to help this type of program, as well as our other programs, get the funding they need to really get off the ground and sustain themselves. So we appreciate them. And we have the thank you, everybody. You know, we're just coming off of our fundraising drive. Want to say anything about that, Lou?
Yeah, if you see, I put up this entire year's worth of everybody, all of you all that have donated to us, individuals as well as organizations that have supported us. It was a great year. We had 3 drives, and everybody kicked in so much to us. We greatly appreciate it. And it keeps our programs active. It allows us to get all this work done, putting out everything with preparedness and resilience, awareness. This year was busy with all of our new outreach programs, with our youth development program that we've been putting together. And we cannot do this without you all contributing. So thank you very much. And it's very much appreciated.
Yeah.
And I do have a $100 donation that came in on our website. It's the best spot to donate to us, from Mark Hardman. Thank you very much. You can donate to us at hveri.org/donate. It's the best way to donate to us. We take super chats as well. If you're comfortable with that, we're good. And we are a 501c community-based organization here on the island, Hawaii. And again, thank you, everybody. I see somebody moving in the back.
Keep talking for a minute, please.
Yep. So like Phil was mentioning earlier, we are taking off the holiday break. I encourage you guys all to take a breath and enjoy your families. Get outside, breathe some fresh air, step away from the screens for a while. That's what we're doing. We spend pretty much every day staring at multiple screens, and it's going to feel good to catch our breath as well. We'll be back after the new year, hopefully healthy and strong and rejuvenated. If anything happens, you good?
that was my internet going out.
Oh, that was you? These guys are falling. These guys are falling apart.
A Hawaii internet situation today.
Yeah. Great. That means I'm next.
Lou, all thanks everybody, and appreciate it. And I think we do have Phil back connected as well to continue on and go dive into a little bit on Kilauea, Mauna Loa. We can also go back and visit that the schedule, because I think Phil wanted to talk about that a little bit for the Volcano Awareness Month coming up in January. So if you want to, I'll dip out if you want to line that up.
I'm gone. There you go. See you later.
Hey guys. So what are we doing?
Okay, so you wanted to talk about the volcano awareness stuff, yes?
I thought you guys were talking about that as a community corner. Is that?
We briefly mentioned it, type of thing. We went over a little bit, but we thought maybe you'd want to talk about it. If you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, well, just be aware that this is going to be beginning before we come back online, right? So anything that's happening before that or update, that's what I thought we would probably like to cover as upcoming events. Do we have that somewhere? Great.
Yeah, lots on the schedule there. Lots to pick from.
Yeah, so it looks like the art poetry contest begins at the beginning of the year there. There's a hike on the first Saturday of the month on the 4th there at Kahuku with the USGS. Right. Sometimes we see these hikes led by national park staff, sometimes USGS. We see USGS leading these hikes now. And then there will be talks roaming at Iwakahuna on the 7th, and then talk story in Nālehu on the 8th, with on the 9th that dynamic year at Kilauea talk at the Cooper Center in Volcano. So we are still in our planning stage of that, but we perhaps will bring you a split update where we'll maybe see what the situation is like, whether we can bring you a full update or stream part of that event, or whether we'll catch that following week's talk as well. So a little bit up in the air on our end, but if you are a diehard and you want to schedule, there it is online for you guys to check out. We'll leave it at that.
All right. We did have a comment from Yvonne that I'd like to just mention real quick. She says, after weeks of measurements, it seems to follow at the Kanenohamo west of Makapui is heating up again, up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. The hottest areas are coming out of the new fissure lines. The ferns and the ohia are now dying right adjacent to the super hot fissures. After weeks of measurement, it seems to follow a cyclic temperature fluctuation that responds to earthquakes and tilt. It's very interesting to find. I'm writing a report about it now. And interesting,
That's awesome.
Maunaulu and Alai crater events are not responding to it.
Well, very, very interesting. Yeah,
thank you.
We'll wait further information, Yvonne. Appreciate that. Yeah.
All right. And with that, I think we are into the Mauna Loa stuff and the Kilauea connection, huh? If you are so ready to do so, or we didn't have any questions that I saw. Let me go back through. Lots been happening.
Looks like I need to get my screen back on here.
Right, I don't. So one question, if you want to take that real quick.
Yeah. All right.
Richard asks, how far below the surface of the crater floor is there molten lava? So
great question. Yeah, I haven't thought about it or tried to calculate it in a while, right? But what we can say is that there was the Kilauea lava lake that was ultimately 440 feet thick. And it was drilled repeatedly. And through that process, they were able to measure the thickness of the crust each time until they got to some molten material. That's probably the best data we actually have. This crater we have now is different dimensions, different depth and all of that, but it's a starting point to try to discuss what the answer might possibly be, right? And so in Kilauea, it took 36 years for it to harden all the way to the center at 200 feet down, 36 years. Within the first couple of years, it was less than 10 feet, less than 20 feet, and it kind of increased from there, right? So for us, since it's been a few years, that's the ballpark I would put it in. You're probably looking at tens to hundreds of feet, maybe something like that. Over 100 feet would be a guess, just based. But you actually could take the formulas and plug them in with the dimensions and all that. I just have not done that exercise myself to be able to answer that question on the spot here. So, but that's a discussion of how you would get to that and a little estimate of what it might be, perhaps. Yeah, great point. Yeah, so there's going to be molten stuff in that crater under the crater floor for a while if it took 36 years for that 200 feet of Kilauea.
All right, good question there. Yeah, I think that does get us through it there.
All right, so let's step back to Volcano Watch this week. USGS has released this article that we have posted across our networks as well. It's on their fact-checking process. And further than that, their peer review process altogether that checks all their articles. So it's interesting just to note that, whenever any USGS, they basically outline 3 types of information that the HVO provides, each of which has a different review process. The first type of information is data from the monitoring instruments, like the seismometers or webcams. So there, we know that the data is automatically collected, and so then you don't need to have to question how was it collected, how good was the collection process, and any of that stuff, right? You kind of have that built in a little bit there. So with that, they can post information online without any further review. It just goes live onto the website on a data stream, which is why we rely on that so much, because it puts out real-time data without any barriers in between. The second type is based on research and years of work. Those are findings such as and published as papers, maps, or presentations. And in the typical peer review process of the industry, there's usually 2 subject matter experts who are not part of the project that review that. That then they provide feedback or sometimes objections. If there are enough objections that can actually stop the publication process and deem something not worthy of publication at that point in time, but if they actually can address and solve all the issues and concerns, then gets to that standard, then it can be published to the standard of that, usually the journal. But the USGS has an extra process. They require, any publication requires sign off from the author's supervisor, as well as a Volcano Science Center director, and a dedicated office official within a USGS. Right, so there's several extra processes within the USGS. Even when USGS are not leading a project, if they're involved, it ensures that everything meets the USGS standard. And that's why they have so many such a rigorous approval process. The third type is information that is interpretation of what the volcanoes and earthquakes are doing right now. So they use those in their volcano alert level notices describing current conditions, their alert level changes, information statements, status reports, and all their updates. Maps showing where magma is moving or lava is advancing, even those preliminary ones are all in this category. So as this information is immediately required, the USGS volcano observatories have special authorization to share it promptly. With these caveats, as long as those involved have received required training, are operating within their area of expertise, and are following established practices. Right, so that's what makes sense. If you're doing everything in a normal process and procedure, even if you're doing it on your own, then there is some trust in that as well, because there's a history of having done it in that same manner. Right, and that's from our end probably where we try to lean the most on that, since we don't have any of that authority of the USGS. We just take the information they have, and then we lean on this last branch of just trying to do things in the same systematic process to avoid errors and mistakes, and sometimes they still happen. It's just the nature of the game. So yeah, while some products are developed, edited, and published by one person, many are developed by a small team of staff who ensure everything is as accurate and clear as possible. So it takes time, but it's the most important step to double and triple check information before it's public. Right, so that's the attitude they take there, and that's the review process of the USGS. That's Volcano Watch this week. And with that, I think we're caught up, since last week was the schedule for the Volcano Awareness Month. So now, in slightly a different order than originally planned, we'll just touch base here on Mauna Loa to start. What's happening in Mauna Loa currently. Here's a recent image from earlier this afternoon of Mauna Loa Summit, Moku'awe'oweo, from the northwest rim. So here's that lava flow on the crater floor that's on the surface in the middle. A lot of it's the 2022 flow, but you also have some remnants of 84 and 75 and further back 1950, all of that, 49 back from there as well. 74, yeah. So there's the current view of Mauna Loa. And the data streams are here. So starting with the 1 week time frame, our tilt meters are just showing that regular day-to-day oscillation, maybe a little bit of wiggle here in the back, but that's hard to pick out as something significant with the volcano, especially when you don't see any earthquakes happening within those same intervals. Earthquakes have been really quite slow in Mauna Loa, all in this shallow depth within the last week. Here's a last month of tilt, and so this signal here is the most interesting one right there, is like what was happening right there. And we've seen in the past some similar adjustments when we've seen the flank of Mauna Loa move in response to Kilauea. So on my board, that might be the number one candidate, but there could also be some other noise effects from weather and things like that that are harder to really pin down when just looking at this graph by itself here. So in any case, without any associated earthquakes that go along with it, it's an adjustment of the volcano and not an indication of buildup to an eruption. That's the key difference there. Because really you're looking at what you want is to see all different signals operating in sync. Earthquakes and tilt and gas and temperature all moving together, and that gives you a better indication of something actually building up to erupt. So we're seeing adjustments in the shallow ground. We're seeing earthquakes adjusting at different times in different places. And overall, that's part of this buildup of Mauna Loa as it's still being injected with magma following 2022. So earthquake rates per week. You can see here we're still in this range of between 10 and 15 earthquakes per week. We had a couple of higher counts earlier, about a month ago, between 25 and 30, but this is really quite low compared to what we saw in 2022. So I'll just keep going past this 1 year. Let's look at the 5-year and look at earthquakes per month. And here you really see that comparison more accurately described. You see there was actually a 2-phase post-eruption where we had slightly higher background. And really, since the beginning of 2024, Mauna Loa, the background has been half of what it was in 2023, really. So it really stepped down quite a bit. And perhaps you see this here in this depth versus time plot. There's quite a lot of ink on here. You see more black than the colors in here, but that's the earthquakes stacked on each other. You can really see how much they're piling up, especially through this build up to the 2022 eruption. And then it quiets right there. You can see then it quiets further, even with this gap visible right through here. And in the meantime, what you see is this interesting cluster of deeper earthquakes, perhaps leading to an injection of magma from deeper into the shallower parts of the volcano. So that's all still adjusting there. And I can see that that's happened at other times in the past, but not quite so distinctly as we saw at the end of 2023. So in comparison, 2024 saw a couple of deep earthquakes clustering here and then more scattered events throughout the later part of the year, but nothing like we saw in 2023 either, or in 2022. It's really been the quietest year thus far of Mauna Loa since that eruption. So that's really the story of Mauna Loa as is what's happening right now. It's not a typical recovery pattern. And with that, we can then switch back to our volcano awareness presentation for this week, which is what is the link between Kilauea and Mauna Loa? What's the connection? It's a question we hear a lot. We've talked about it before. We'll just refresh the usual talking points in case we have anyone that would like to be reminded or has seen this for the first time. So we'll start here with this as a map or a couple of plots. At the top is Mauna Loa eruptions. And this is plotted in magma volume per eruption in cubic kilometers. So that's what this scale means, right? So there's like some eruption that with unknown volume. And then you see here's one eruption, and here's a couple of small eruptions, and one bigger one, a couple bigger ones, a couple even bigger ones, smaller ones, and that's how they're plotting this here. And this relates to the same years on the bottom. Here's our time scale from 1800 to the year 2000, 200 years there. And in red, we have now cumulative magma volume for Kilauea. So not plotted the same way as up here. They're basically adding each one to the next, right? So now what we care about is how steep is the slope. If it's going up steeply like this, then those are big volume eruptions because you see we're going, let's call it from 1.7 to 3.5. There's a 1.8, right? That's a pretty big volume of magma there. So then in comparison, once you get past 1840, this demarcation on here, you see that rate gets a lot slower. Each eruption is producing a lot less volume individually. So from 1840 all the way to 1950 is this era of slow Kilauea injection, right? The magma is still coming into Kilauea, it's still erupting. It's not shut off all the way, but it's doing it at a much lower rate here. And during that same interval is when we see Mauna Loa producing the bulk of its eruptions in historical record here, right? From 1840 to 1950. Since 1950 Mauna Loa, we've only had 1975, 1984, and off to the right here, 2022 now. And so overall, much more white space in between each eruption is the era that we're in currently, as far as we can tell still, on Mauna Loa, right? So this is the first thing to note. And I'll lean back on when we started off talking about Mauna Loa and showed the recent talk by Frank Truesdale and Ingrid Johansson at Volcano Awareness Month last year, that they had this discussion about whether these volcanoes were correlated in eruptions, and his answer was, as a mapper, they are absolutely anti-correlated. When Mauna Loa has lots of lava flows on its surface, Kilauea does not, and vice versa. So beyond this actual volumes, this is another way to say the same thing. He's actually kind of looked at the actual flows, and by mapping out how big is the flow, how wide is the flow, how deep is the flow, that's how you get to this volume. So that's what this is embedding right here, right? This is how much lava there is on Mauna Loa from this time period, right? And how little there is of Kilauea as well. So why might this be? There have been a lot of papers in the past, and I decided it would not be useful to go back and do a whole history of like what we've thought about the different ways we thought of this connection in the past. I'm just going to jump to the end here and put forth what's our best idea right now of how this actually works, right? And just realizing it is a snapshot in time. We don't have all the answers, but that's where we are. So I'll start with this paper that came out in 2012 by Gonnerman, Foster, Michael Poland, Cecily Wolf, Brooks, and Asta Miklius. So a combination here of, I'll just come down so you can see, Rice University, SOIST at UH Manoa, USGS HVO, with one of the authors moving on to Carnegie Institute there. And that's who's in on this and what they are. This is the paper here, and this is in Nature Geoscience Letters. And there's a few interesting things in here, and it really comes down to this model they propose right here. They say that their model, which is basically saying that there's this area deep underneath the island above the hotspot that is somewhat flat, and calling it this porous melt accumulation layer, so that within this area you have flow of magma in different directions. And this area has different chemical signatures in different areas. It's like a stew in some ways. And you might think of it like there's beans over here, but there's corn over here, right? So there's different amounts of different stuff in each part. So that when each pipe comes up, one to Kilauea and one to Mauna Loa, you see that difference in the magma that comes out. One might have more beans, one might have more corn, right? Not exactly, right? You're talking about the magnesium and iron and those kind of things, right? But just to try to make it more relatable here. And so that's what you have to account for, is you have to still allow for this difference in chemistry to exist between both volcanoes, but find a way that, in their case, through pore pressure, you can then transfer the pressure from one eruption down this pipe to this layer, across a layer, and up to the other volcano. And so that's what they're modeling here, and that they're showing results of what their model actually shows, that there can be a significant impact. There is a time delay. They say the typical time is about 6 months between one thing happening in one volcano and that pore pressure traveling down, across, and up to the other one. Right. So that pore pressure change does not change the pathways. It doesn't change the chemistry. It does include that sometimes mysterious time delay that occurs as well. And they do this by having this unique period in time where you have no eruption in Mauna Loa. So you can basically use your INSAR to calculate how much volcano has grown and swollen during time. You have no magma coming out of Halemaumau yet, right? That began in 2008, but this study here is going back to before that. They only have lava coming out of Pu'o at the East Rift. So they're combining that. They do note this enigmatic deep rift storage zone, right? So they're trying to use INSAR and other GPS and stuff for that to kind of capture how much is this whole volcano growing, swelling, and all that, to, even if it's deep underground, account for how much volume is coming into it altogether to make the model actually work. So that is how it looks. It's the easiest one to look at. Here's the formulas. And here are some results, right? So they actually are using things like summit CO2 emission rate, and carbon dioxide is one of the earliest gases to bubble out of the magma as it's coming up. It comes out pretty deep. So it's often used as a proxy, as a replacement, or a hint at a way to get at the supply rate of magma to the volcano. And so that's what they've modeled here, the supply rate and a model input into that area, right? This QI up here is how much is coming in from below from the hotspot into this whole zone that then gets split into all these different pathways here. Right? So that's part of their equation there. And then they have how much is coming out of the East Rift Zone, which is their red line over here. Right? That's how they actually have it modeled. And the actual line is the model, and the actual dots are the data. So you see that their model is fitting the data very well all across here. And 2001 to 2011 here. What they're noting, and this is the interesting thing here to show how much the effect actually can be, is they are saying here, two lines, look at the dashed blue line versus the solid blue line. The dashed blue line is with a constant East Rift Zone eruption rate, whereas with the actual East Rift eruption rate varying here, this big spike right there, right, Kilauea here, you actually see that affects how Mauna Loa, this is the distance across Mauna Loa summit, how much is Mauna Loa swelling, how much is it filling up. And what they're basically saying is if you account for this pore pressure effect of Kilauea erupting on the rift zone, with this very varying pulsing rate, you actually can then match the actual data. Once again, the small faded blue dots are the real data, and the darker line is the model. You actually fit the real data by showing that there is an effect of Kilauea on Mauna Loa through that pore pressure, right? So that's really fascinating there, right? And here's another way to look at that. The volume buildup in Mauna Loa without lava coming out of Kilauea could have actually been, what's that? Maybe 30% higher than it was up through 2011. And the reason it didn't is because you're robbing pore pressure from lava leaking out of Kilauea during that time. That's basically the long and short of it. So that's one of the more interesting connections recently of Kilauea Mauna Loa that I think is fascinating. Like they say they can explain everything with just that. So that's really amazing. But there's another effect that's also been discussed here. And let me come up to the top of this paper so you can see what it is. Open paper, scientific reports, Nature. This was just published, was it last year or the year before? Year before, 2022. And this is by Perzior, Dauria, Pepe, Tizani, and Cabrera Perez. And these guys are at Canary Islands in Volcan in Spain. Also in technological institutes in Spain, renewable energy institutes, and electromagnetic. Yeah, Nāpau is down here as well. So Spain and Italy looks like this group. And I will just jump to the money image here. The paper goes through a lot of the mechanics. They actually start off with what data do they see on the surface? How can they make a model based on other information that's been published that can then be calibrated to fit the data and show the interaction of Kilauea Mauna Loa through the model. And so, like, kind of skipping to the end here, they validated that their procedure. And so this is what the procedure is actually showing is the effect in general from what happens at Kilauea Mauna Loa. So let me talk through this a little bit. First of all, what are we looking across? We're looking at a line that cuts across Kilauea Summit and Mauna Loa Summit, which means it starts over here in Kona area and ends down here in the Puna Coast area near Kalapana, perhaps. Right, that's on the left Kona and on the right Kalapana right there. So looking at profile, they've exaggerated the elevation here, but that's top of Mauna Loa. Kilauea is quite a bit shorter, just overlapping the flank of Mauna Loa there. And what they're showing here is the geometries of magma reservoirs within each mountain. So Mauna Loa is thought to have this very long dike, right, that goes across and connects rift zones at depth and goes underneath the summit as well as a much smaller summit reservoir that's something like more like a dot of that size on there as well, right? And the orientation is that it's subvertical, as in it's more or less up and down with a little bit of a lean. as shown here in this image. And this is exaggerated how big it actually is as well right there, right? But that's under Mauna Loa. That's how Mauna Loa fills and deforms this volcano, is through that geometry. Kilauea is different. Kilauea has a shallower reservoir that's more like what they call more like a sphere, like more like a ball, a roundish oblate spheroid, if you want to be more technical there. A roundish thing, and it's underlain by a big flat structure that's more like a sill structure. That's more of our deep reservoir, right? Our South Caldera reservoir is actually flatter than it is tall by this interpretation of the model, which they actually go through by doing independent component analysis and all the data, and then it's picking out the answer and all of that I've skipped over here. So this is all pretty good, right? And so what do you get out of that? And it comes down to this. When Mauna Loa inflates, when magma comes into Mauna Loa in its reservoir, that because of the shape and orientation of it, it puts out extra pressure towards Kilauea, which is over here. And so Kilauea, there is that summit chamber and that deeper sill, actually is concentrating this extra stress and strain here. And that does affect Kilauea. So if Mauna Loa is filling with magma and injecting, and that is going to push on Kilauea and put pressure on it, and actually may cause Kilauea to shut off, in fact. That's what you see here. And the flip side of that is when you do that to Kilauea, you do not see that same effect on Mauna Loa. The geometry of a sphere makes it localized to Kilauea, so there's no effect to Mauna Loa. When you do that deeper sill complex, it's a much bigger effect, a much bigger body, but the effect you see is more up and down. So it affects the south flank of Kilauea there, much more so, and really no effect on Mauna Loa whatsoever. So that's the second part, is this
the
stress and strain effect of filling in different craters. Yes, Dane.
Yeah, so, a lot of detailed analysis went into this. And my oversimplified reaction to it was, okay, so Mauna Loa bullies Kilauea. Got it. Oversimplified to the extreme, but seems to kind of the relationship. There is an influence. Mauna Loa dominates it.
Yeah. It's a one-way. It's a one-way relationship, right? Like, yeah, you can go for bully. You could go for, like, I don't know, like a parent and a child has been done before. You could go with, yeah, anything like that. But one dominates the other for sure, right? Mauna Loa, we've used the car analogy before. Mauna Loa is in the driver's seat in this case all the time, and Kilauea never gets to drive, right? Unlike in Kilauea, South Flank and Summit, they take turns. But between Mauna Loa and Kilauea, Mauna Loa is always the one driving.
Kilauea is lucky if it gets to sit in the front seat.
So that's the second effect, right? And so you actually can see that both effects can explain it. So you likely have some combination of both things going on there, right? And I thought to maybe kind of tie it together and tie the whole Mauna Loa story together here. We can come back to this paper we started off with earlier, and I'll just jump straight to the graphic schematic of how this may have come to be. And so actually, there's a part of the story I skipped earlier, but in 2002 to 2005, there was inflation of both Kilauea and Mauna Loa together at the same time. That was when they first started thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? These volcanoes are actually doing something together for the first time. And so then they started pulling at this relationship. And so it can be that with a big influx to the hotspot, that both can inflate together, right? And only when you have it not in that situation do you have this anti-correlation. That's an important thing to note here as well. But that's not where we are now. So in 2002 and 2005 is where they first saw that synchronous inflation of both of the volcanoes, and it's thought that that's when you saw. Well, there were also those deep earthquakes, deep long period earthquakes, 45 kilometers down, and magma moving from that time, 2002 to 2005, upwards, possibly into this 13 and 14 kilometer deep magma storage area through there. So it's sitting in there. We see intrusion, inflation, and stuff all in the mid 2000s, all from this batch that's injected as far as here. And so then they say June 2022, increase in inflation, alternating northwest faults and the summit earthquakes swarms. And they imagine that being the ascension of this magma to the next depth, right? The magma likes to park itself where it's happy in certain depths. And so it went from this happy spot, it was not happy anymore. It was too much heat or gas or something, right? Buoyancy. And it came up to this intermediate reservoir where they see 1 to 10 year cycles of dissolution and recrystallization. So magma has been sitting in here for between 1 and 10 years, gathering, with this latest batch in June 2022. Then in September 2022, 10 weeks of sustained intrusion from that intermediate reservoir to the upper reservoir right there. And then finally, on November 27th, 2022, 45 minutes of earthquakes and tremor to go from that upper reservoir to the surface, erupting right there. And they pull us out from all this olivine crystal and analysis, the zonings of them, the chemical zonings of them, the dissolution and recrystallization patterns on there as well. So that's the really cool thing about that. And that's how it ties it back all together. So what do we actually see on Kilauea to wrap this whole story up here? Let's see, let's make this a little bigger here. As big as it'll go. All right, so let's start off with just the zoomed in version. We're going to jump to December 4th. Mauna Loa has been erupting for a little less than a week when we start seeing the shut off of Kilauea. That was a thermal camera, and here's a visible camera, KW camera as well, of that shut off December 4th and 5th. Right, so a little bit more detail. We can come back here. Let's show you this in a little more detail. I'm going to go back to November the 1st, so about a month before Mauna Loa erupts. What's Kilauea doing? Lava lake is overturning. You have a few little pop-up ooze-ups here and there around the edge as well. So magma is still coming into Kilauea. It's still circulating until that slowdown, which by the 8th you see complete pause, a reactivation 14th and 15th. It shuts off all the way for about 3.5 weeks before it pops back up in January. And that goes until March. Right here in March, you see the lava lake circulating again, and then it stagnates and shuts off a final time with one last flare up there. So here we are in a period of 6 months. Kilauea is now all the way shut off, right? And so that's really fascinating, right? To think about this prior period of time, Mauna Loa is inflating more and more and more. We saw this graph of the stress, how it pushes on Kilauea. And so it's feeling the push more and more and more. And eventually it actually shuts all the way off. And what makes this different from any other shut off of Kilauea? Well, the answer there is that it restarted up within 3 weeks, within 4 weeks of it shutting off, because Mauna Loa then stopped and gave the baton back, got out of the car, so to speak. And so now Kilauea can be the one in charge again. And so that's, I'll play that for you guys one more time. It goes kind of fast there, that whole 6-month process. November with the ooze-ups there at Kilauea Summit Lava Lake. December, so the eruption of Mauna Loa has begun already. 5-6 days in, we see that stagnation at Kilauea's lake. Some lake overturning, 3-week pause. We've called it a new eruption because it popped up in a different part of the crater, but you could go back and who knows if someone will one day reclassify it as a pause. I think it's still possible, we'll see. And then near a final shut off a few months later, right? And so longer term, what happened after this, right? This was the eruption of Kilauea that lasted, what was it? From November 21 to December 22 that was 15 months before Mauna Loa shut it off the first time. That 3-week gap, a 3 to 4 week gap, and then it went 2 more months. And every eruption since then has been shorter and briefer. We had June 23 on the southwest wall of Kilauea. It popped up, lasted, what was it, a couple of weeks, and ended. We had September on the eastern down drop block that lasted about a week and then it ended. We had the southwest rift eruption, lasted a few hours and ended. We had the southeast rift eruption, lasted a few days and ended. So this is the one that broke it, right? What broke this whole pattern of long eruptions at Kilauea Summit was the effect of Mauna Loa on Kilauea. If we go back in time, that's when this actually happened. So they're playing on each other. Kilauea is still filling and going through all these adjustments we talk about all the time, but it's doing it in a different way now because Mauna Loa is pushing in it different. Before it was really filling, then it erupted, sagged back, and now Kilauea has got the baton and can adjust more so. But over time, Mauna Loa will keep inflating, keep swelling, and then something will happen again in the future, and that'll be interesting to keep track of there. So we'll have one last video, and this is just the visible. This is the VI camera here, and the last overflow or overturning process of lava coming over the crust, flowing in that crater. This is the last lava we saw in that pit as a Mauna Loa eruption was ending there. So since we have a slightly better view of the camera here, and it gets really messy, start doing days and nights over long periods of time, but it was a nice welcome sight to see these images of the lava here again. So that's a little bit of our recap on connection of Kilauea and Mauna Loa, and that does conclude our series on celebrating Mauna Loa's 2-year anniversary. It's been full 2 years now since eruption ended, and yeah, back to you guys.
Yeah, we do have one question that came through here, pretty relevant, and see if I can do this. This question does there seem to be any correlation between Mauna Loa and Kilauea slowing down and Kamehameha increasing in activity? So getting third-partied essentially. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we can see that there is a correlation, Ed. I mean, it's a great question. I don't think Kamehameha had enough activity that we've seen, and it's also harder to tell because we don't have GPS stations on there. We can't do INSAR on the thing underwater, so we just don't have quite as much data, right? You can go down a submarine and scan it, and that's how you can get these differences. But obviously, you can't do that all the time. So I would bet there probably is an effect if this is true with the pore pressure, especially, right? Maybe not so much the stress there. Mauna Loa is really big and it leans on Kilauea, so maybe it doesn't seem to be quite leaning on Kamehameha as much. I would think, and maybe there's an effect there. But the pore pressure, especially, I would say, yeah, there it would be very reasonable to think that does extend to that volcano too. Yeah, great point. We'll ask for that in the next version. They won't usually do version 2 of the paper, right? But if they ever do, then that's would be a good one to do. Iterate on.
I also assume we need more data type of thing in the modern time where we know that there's an eruption and are able to do something, that's submarine or whatever it may be, just to have that modern eruption in this day with the technology where it is, to be able to do maybe something more than been done in the past. I don't know. It's so rough with how deep it is underwater.
Yeah. I mean, at one point they actually had an ocean bottom seismometer on there with a big cable attached to the island, but that eventually broke and couldn't be fixed. So that's the problem with that. You try, but it's challenging.
Yep. All right, and that does it for questions, I believe. And yeah, long year and coming to the end. We appreciate everybody that's been with us throughout this whole process over the past year, and we look forward to moving forward into 2025. Got to take a little bit of time to recharge the batteries, see the family, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. It's been great to have everyone's support here over the last year, and we stayed busy. Volcanoes kept us busy. 2 eruptions again this year. We've mentioned already now. It's been 8 in the last 6 years. So yeah, we'll take a little break here, and Kilauea will keep up her activity by the looks of it for the next year to come, right? A year ago, we're noting how much activity was happening in our Kilauea summit, and that maybe that would be finally time for the rift zones to get involved. That happened this past year, and so for this next year, it would not be surprising to see more activity on the rift zones now that they're already established, right? And not necessarily that it might expand beyond where it already is, but just that what we've seen happen this year keeps happening next year is more likely. I would be like the very most general prognosis we can give here of what seems likely. And I've always used to say, when I give tours and all that, the caveat being that one big earthquake can change everything. So you can see the pressure build, everything, just reset things, change the pathways, change the supply, all of it, right? So that's always a caveat and why we stay on call, and we'll be around if
Yeah.
something happens. Yeah, in the next few weeks,
Right,
we'll
and-
do our best to come update you guys. Go ahead, Dane.
And there's always the chance of the large earthquake on island too. That's never always out there, kind of lurking in the background, somewhat possible at any given time.
Yeah, so hopefully, yeah, all of you guys who are troopers here, an hour and a half in, will have heard all of our earthquake awareness, preparedness talk, and you're prepared for those. You're prepared for any tsunami that might come from them as well. Those are the most likely things, and maybe some bad air blows through now and then, depending on the wind direction. So yeah, I appreciate all you guys. Happy holidays, happy New Year. Our planned return is going to be January 9th. Okay, that's going to be 2 weeks off, 3 weeks from today is our planned return. So unless anyone's got anything else from all of our team here at HVERI, mahalo everybody. This includes our ASL interpreters, Dano and Carrie. Mahalo you guys. We'll have to incorporate some more volcano signing next year, more of that, teaching us some volcano signs. We have Lou in the back end, mahalo Lou, for all the fundraising work and the updates and the community corners you guys have been doing here. And as always, Dane DuPont and myself, Philip Ong. So from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education Resilience Institute, aloha everyone.